So we're starting a series today, as you can see, and as you've heard, called So You're Telling Me There's a Chance. Now, anybody have any idea where that title comes from? From one of the greatest comedic movies ever made, from one of the best lines in that movie. Dumb and Dumber. I got the clip for you. This is it right here.
What do you think the chances are of a guy like you and a girl like me ending up together?
Well, Lloyd, that's difficult to say, and we really don't...
Hit me with it. Just give it to me straight. I came a long way just to see you married. Just, least you can do is level with me. What are my chances?
Not good.
You mean not good like 1 out of 100?
I'd say more like 1 out of 1,000,000.
So you're telling me there's a chance? Yeah!
Okay, there's the line. And so, 1 out of 1,000,000 chance that they're going to get together, that's funny because he had no chance and was clueless about that. But the chances for marriage these days is pretty grim. 1 out of 2 aren't going to make it. Actually, the chance of the first marriage ending in divorce over a 40-year period is 67%. And half of all divorces occur in the first 7 years. The second marriage, the divorce rate jumps another 10%. And none of that's funny, that's sad. But every marriage has a chance. And we don't have to be clueless about this. The key really is knowing what the Bible says about marriage and then simply doing it and obeying it. And I'm just telling you, you are guaranteed to make it if you will. And so a word to a few of you. If you're single, there's many applicable things in this series for you. Really what this is about is human interaction. It's just marriage intensifies human interaction, and that's why we got to concentrate on it in the context of marriage. We're going to talk over the next couple of weeks about divorce predictors, how you can predict divorce in a marriage, and some of you are already divorced, and some of the content I'll talk to you about is a little bit difficult in that regard. And you're going to be tempted to feel some shame and guilt that you shouldn't, and I just urge you to reject that and urge you to know that God is not done with you yet. And there's some things that you're going to reflect back on, but there's stuff that you're going to take from this that's going to prepare you as you move forward. And then there's some of you that rolled in here today and your marriage is just hanging by a thread, and maybe you came on your own without your spouse, and just want to affirm you and encourage you and want you to know that one of the things that about our church is that it's this is a safe place to kind of work your stuff out, because we just do that together. We're a faith family. And one of the things we say around here is it's okay to not be okay. It's just not okay to stay that way. And so a church family comes around each other and helps each other to grow. And so you might be ready to throw in the towel. Will you just hang on and will you just journey with us, please, over these 6 weeks? And let's see if God doesn't do something special in your marriage, and then we'll walk with you. Maybe we get to help each other as we go. A few years ago, I was reading a book by the guy named Malcolm Gladwell, and he referenced another guy named John Gottman. And John Gottman is a PhD and a professor at the University of Washington who has gained significant notoriety because he can predict with a 91% accuracy if a couple's marriage is going to make it, but the kicker is he can do it within about the first 5 minutes of observing that couple. So within 5 minutes of observing a couple, he can tell whether or not their marriage is going to make it. And one of the environments that he set up to learn this was what he called the Love Lab, which was really an apartment that he set up with a bunch of two-way mirrors and some cameras in there, and then he put sensors on the couple, and they would just volunteer to live there, and they just get observed living life. 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., never in the bathroom, but otherwise just watch their life. And he learned just through all that research kind of what makes marriage work. and what the death knell is for a marriage. He says he did it to uncover the truth about marriage, to answer questions that have puzzled people for so long, like why is marriage so tough at times, and why do some lifelong relationships click while others tick away like a time bomb? How can you prevent a marriage from going bad or rescue one that already has? And Gottman would tell you today that he has the answers to those questions. And he says it has nothing to do with point of view or opinion or approach or training. He says that the marriage advice and equipping that he gives people is based on the hard scientific data that he has accumulated over the years, that there is hard scientific data why some marriages make it and some marriages don't. And so in this series, we're going to talk about that data. Now, his divorce predictors have given him some notoriety, but he would say that the most rewarding thing that he has in his career is what he calls the 7 principles for making marriage work. And so the way we're going to do this is I'm going to talk to you for the first 2 weeks on the divorce predictors, and then we're going to talk about the next 4 weeks on these principles for making marriage work that sort of come out of those predictors. Now, the way that this came about is I learned about Gottman, then I read his research, then I took his research and I gave it to our biblical counselors, our marriage counselors, and then I sat down with Hutch and Liz and Di, and what we did was said, what is the biblical principle? What are the biblical principles that Gottman is teaching, whether he knows it or not? Let's figure out what those biblical principles are that he's teaching, and then we're going to teach those principles, and that then will kind of augment or be the foundation for the scientific data. So we'll look at the data, but this data that's essentially supporting what God in his Bible has already told us about marriage and relationships. So 2 weeks on the predictors, 4 weeks on the principles, kind of a long series on marriage, but kind of important, right? And so today, Divorce Predictors Part 1. There are 6 predictors, 6 things that you can see it in a relationship and you know they're headed for trouble when you see these things. We're going to look at 2 today, 4 next week. Of the 2 today, the second one has 4 parts to it. And so that's what you see in your notes there. Okay, so let me say this kind of thing before we get going about arguing, because arguing is kind of a part of all of this. Mass confession, if you want to confess. Anybody ever argue in your marriage, or is it just Rami and I that okay, all right, good. Your hand was late coming up, bro, but good job. Okay, so yeah, now this is real normal, right? The whole argue in marriage thing. Conflict resolution is not the holy grail for your marriage. Effective conflict resolution is not what makes a marriage succeed, in part because most marital arguments can't be resolved. And Gottman will talk about this because most disagreements are rooted in fundamental differences in lifestyle, personality, and values. We're going to talk about that more in depth in a few weeks. But arguing is a reality. But you can predict divorce in a couple, not based on whether or not they argue, but what? How they argue. The way in which they argue. The divorce predictors emerge out of observations about how a couple deals with their disagreements, how they argue. There are incredibly happy marriages that have robust arguments, but they're very happy. And so it's not about the argument and the conflict resolution skills. That stuff's important, but more how you go about it when you're in it. Not if you argue, but how you argue. Okay, so with that context, the first sign that divorce is coming is called harsh startup. Harsh startup. I've got a friend who is a colleague. That makes him a pastor. That makes this even that much more funny. When he was kind of newly married, but married long enough to have 4 children, so he had 4 small kids at home, and he works his pastor job, and then comes home, and his wife sort of slaving around the house all day, and she could use some help from him. And so he comes home one day and very sensitively and maturely lays down on the living room floor, puts a pillow under his head, and kind of gathers his kids around him and watches the cartoons that they're watching while she's in the kitchen getting dinner ready. And then he finally kind of leans over and looks towards her for a moment and says, "So, honey, what'd you do all day?" Yeah, it's not a great question to ask at that stage of life. Because she says, "What do you think I did all day? I watched these 4 kids and cleaned up the messes that they make." And my friend just didn't respond, just watched the cartoon. Then she says, "Do you think maybe you could get up and help me get dinner ready?" And then he says, whoa, just tell me what you need, and I'll be glad to do it. But he doesn't move. He just keeps watching the television. And so she says, "Well, I shouldn't have to tell you what I need. You should be able to observe what I need and come and help me." So now he gets a little defensive and says, "Look, you don't have to yell at me. I'm just right over here. Besides, I can't read your mind on these things. And besides, I'm helping you right now by watching the children." And at that moment, without any other statements, a 1.5-pound slab of bacon flies across the room and catches him in the face and wraps around his face. She threw the bacon across the house and slapped him in the face with it. And he said his first thought was, "It's an unbelievable arm." Okay, that is harsh startup. And the Bible says all kinds of things about the harsh startup. Like Proverbs 15:1, a harsh word stirs up anger. Or Proverbs 15:18, a hot-tempered person stirs up conflict and the bacon starts flying. Or James chapter 1, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. The research shows that if your discussion with your spouse begins with a harsh startup, it will inevitably end on a negative note. It will not produce the righteousness that God desires, even if there are attempts to make nice in between. Statistics show that 96% of the time you can predict the outcome of a conversation based on its first 3 minutes. 96% of the time you can predict the outcome of a conversation based on its first 3 minutes. Now, first 3 minutes is biblically quick. Quick to listen, not to speak. Slow to speak, slow to become angry. Because the harsh startup dooms you to failure 96% of the time. Just by starting soft, you give your marriage a greater chance of succeeding. Now, just sort of as an aside, what do you do when your spouse does start harsh? How do you respond to the harsh startup? Well, you respond biblically. Proverbs 15 again. A gentle answer turns away the harsh startup, but the harsh word stirs up anger. And then Proverbs 15. A hot-tempered person stirs up conflict, but the one who is patient calms a quarrel. So, no harsh startup, but when it does happen, now the responsibility is on you to not throw the bacon. Harsh startup stirs up anger, and when that happens, negativity starts to roll. And John Gottman says there are certain kinds of negativity, if allowed to run rampant, are so lethal to the relationship that he calls them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And that's what we'll talk about now. That's divorce predictor number 2 is the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And when I heard Gottman use this terminology, I immediately thought of the Lord of the Rings and the way in the trilogy the director depicted the horsemen, remember? The dark and sinister, and they always signaled that something evil, something bad was coming. And that's what these 4 horsemen do. These 4 horsemen indicate that there is violence ahead, that there is disaster ahead, and you see these horsemen coming, and you know that the end of the relationship is coming. So we're going to look at these 4 horsemen now, and you can see that they'll kind of build on each other. They sort of come in a progression. Here's the first one: criticism. Criticism. Now, when I talk about criticism, I'm not talking about complaint. There's a world of difference between criticism and complaint. You will always have complaints about your spouse. So Rami might say, oh, by the way, we're going 6 weeks on marriage. I can't preach sermons on marriage without referencing my own marriage. The innocent victim in all of that is my precious wife. And so I think it would be good if we just gave my wife a clap, thanking her for staying married to me and being in my sermons. Bless her heart. But I might kind of write the sermon. I go, okay, now, Raim, here's the stuff I got to tell people, and then we negotiate. Okay, so if Rami was to say to me, I think you're doing too much, or you shouldn't have spent that money, or you were too harsh on the girls, those are complaints. And they're normal complaints. Those are the kind of complaints that are a part of any marriage. Now, you just don't use harsh startup to bring them up, but those are legit complaints. What a complaint does is it addresses just a specific action. I think you were too harsh on the girls. A criticism, okay, criticism is one of the horsemen. Complaint isn't. It's criticism that's one of the horsemen. That's more global. It addresses then your spouse's character or personality. It questions motive. It pronounces guilt. It observes a method and declares a motive. It observes a method and declares a motive. A complaint addresses a behavior. A criticism assesses character. A complaint addresses behavior. Criticism assesses character. Criticism goes to the heart. So, complaint can easily become criticism. I think you're doing too much because you're selfish. You shouldn't have spent that money. You're greedy. I think you were too harsh on the girls because you're on a power trip. Okay, now we've gone from complaint to what? Criticism. Gottman says to turn any complaint into a criticism, you just add this favorite line. What is wrong with you? Anybody ever asked this question? What is wrong with? Now, let me say this. In parenting, we ask this question a lot to our kids, and it seems much more reasonable in parenting. Like, what is wrong with you? Because we really want to know. But with your spouse, it's probably not a good question. It's really not a good question anyway. I'm kidding. Because it's condescending and critical. What is wrong with you? The Bible doesn't use the word criticize very much. Instead, it uses a stronger word, judge or judgment. Like Luke chapter 6. Do not judge or you'll be judged. Don't condemn. You'll be condemned. Forgiven, you'll be forgiven. In other words, don't form an opinion about a person's character in the absolute sense. Don't pronounce punishment on somebody based on your opinion of their core character. That's the kind of stuff that's reserved for Jesus. James 4. There's only one lawgiver and judge. That's capital L, capital J. The one who is able to save and destroy, but you, who are you to judge your neighbor? Who are you to be critical of your neighbor? When a person says, don't judge me, they're really saying, don't criticize me, don't assess my character based on a behavior that you just observed. We're going to let God do that. Now, the remedy to criticism is in the Bible. It's Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is, look at these words, helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. So the key here is that criticism or judgment is not helpful, does not build up, and does not benefit the listener, especially in an argument. That's just foolish. Seriously, you're in an argument with your spouse, and so then you pull out criticism? That might make you feel better, Well, it sure isn't helpful, doesn't build up, doesn't benefit the spouse, isn't going to help your marriage. So you get to talk about behavior, you just do it without making judgment. Okay, now, that said, just as an aside, there is time in your marriage to discuss some criticism. But you know when you do that? On a Sunday evening on the deck with a cold beverage in your hand, talking to your friend. Hey, you know, when you do this thing, I wonder if that's because this part of your life. You don't sling that at somebody in the midst of an argument. This is a conversation that you have with your friend, and you're trying to help each other. Hey, I think this might be a blind spot in your life. You do this particular behavior. I wonder if it's because of this sort of core sin issue or this core fear issue or this core character flaw in you. And let's talk about that. That's when you get to do that, but not in an argument. Criticism and argument, no, we don't put those together. Complaint? That's normal in a relationship. Now, some of you complain too much. That's called flooding. We'll talk about that next week. Complaint is normal. Criticism opens the gate to a far deadlier horseman. Horseman number 2 is contempt. Contempt. Now, what's contempt? Well, here's 3 D words for you to write down. Despise, disdain, disgust. Despise, disdain, disgust. Contempt includes sarcasm and cynicism, eye-rolling, sneering, mockery, hostile humor, name-calling. Husbands do this to their wives. Wives do this to their husbands. Gottman says it's the worst of the 4 horsemen because it's poisonous. And the reason it's poisonous is really maybe the word we'll work on a little bit is the word disgust. Because it's virtually impossible to resolve an argument when your spouse realizes that they disgust you. Anybody ever say, you're not going to be proud of this, but anybody ever say in your marriage, like, you make me sick? That's contempt. You disgust me. That's contempt. Rolling your eyes, huffing, shaking your head, sneering, that's contempt. It's really close to hate. Now, contempt, where that comes from, it's fueled by long-simmering negative thoughts about your spouse. It has to be a while as this develops. And so unresolved conflict is a fuel of contempt. Unforgiveness is the rocket fuel of contempt, and it is toxic. Toxic is a good word because couples who are contemptuous of each other are more likely to suffer from infectious illnesses than other people. Unforgiveness and bitterness and contempt, it physically does damage on a person. And when you see contempt, it's obvious and startling and kind of depressing. Because you know, like when you see it, you know a couple doesn't have a chance when you see contempt. Ever been out with some friends, maybe just socializing, and then you see sort of a tense interaction begin, and then you watch something happen in that little conversation where you feel really uncomfortable, like, ooh. And then you talk later with your spouse and you go, hey, did you see that? That doesn't look good for those guys. Some time ago, I had a couple in my house. Rami and I were trying to help them in their marriage. They were struggling, and so we were sort of refereeing a conversation, and they were working out some stuff, and then there was this moment, this flash, where this horseman came charging into the room, where the wife showed contempt for her husband. You could see it on her face, in her body language, the tone of her voice, and the words that she said, and it was startling. And it was so startling that I actually brought it up and we began to work on the concept of contempt. And when that night was over, Rami and I talked and we went, uh-oh, did you see that? Yeah, they kind of don't have a chance. A few weeks ago, I had friends of ours, a married couple, ask me if I wouldn't help them resolve an issue that they'd been dealing with for a long time. And so I sat in their living room with them and they argued. And I kind of helped steer it and referee it. And they were working on an issue that they've been working on really since the beginning of their marriage. And they've never, ever really resolved it. And And it's just like this constant source of contention for them. And so I was in there trying to help them, move it along. And they did not argue with much sophistication. They didn't follow all the rules of conflict resolution. They weren't very good at validating each other and talking this stuff out. And I'm a terrible marriage counselor, so I wasn't any help really to them. But you know what they never did? They never showed contempt for one another. They're friends, they like each other, they're married, they've had this area of conflict their whole marriage. But they never showed any contempt for each other. One of those marriages ended in a brutal divorce. The other one sent me a thank you note. The difference? Contempt or no contempt. If you feel contempt towards your spouse, when you have these flashes of contempt, I'm telling you, you need help with this. Now, the beginning point and remedy is Ephesians chapter 4 that says this: get rid of all contempt. It's just a description of contempt right there. Bitterness, rage and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Instead, do this: be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you, which shows you that the remedy for contempt is forgiveness. Unforgiveness breeds contempt. If you are overly critical of your spouse, that also breeds contempt. Third horseman is defensiveness. Defensiveness. So criticism leads to contemptuousness that then leads to defensiveness. Defensive is you are being very anxious to challenge or avoid criticism. You are unwilling to accept responsibility. You typically blame when you are being defensive. Defensiveness always includes excuses. Here is the one ironic and startling truth about defensiveness: it never works. Ironically, it never works because the attacking spouse never backs down because you got defensive. You know why? Because defensiveness is a way of escalating the argument by now blaming your spouse in return. You're saying the problem isn't me, it's you. You never pick up your clothes. Well, if you wouldn't have bought me those clothes. Oh, it's my fault now. Oh, see, I see. You keep parking the car too close to the garage wall. Yeah, well, if you got a better job, we could get a house with a bigger garage. That's defensive and disrespectful. Defensiveness does not work. It never works, because what you're doing when you're defensive is you're forcing your spouse to make their case even that much more vigorously. You get defensive and make an excuse that therefore minimizes your spouse's complaint, and now they've got to try again because their complaint is likely legit. You're parking too close to the garage wall. So now they don't feel validated and heard, and so now they're frustrated and they got to make their case even stronger, and the argument escalates. I have a tendency to get defensive with Ramey because I'm never wrong. And that's the truth. But that's kind of a thing with me. I have trouble admitting it when I'm wrong. I think that's a self-esteem thing. There's some deep core flaw in me that I think that if I admit that I'm wrong, that I'm less of a person. That somehow it's unthinkable for me to actually be wrong about something. And so when she comes to me with a complaint, my tendency is to give excuses and maybe turn it on her. Ramey gets defensive in part because I have some high standards, and I can struggle with being critical and demanding, and a spouse has trouble living under that constantly, and so they tend then to get defensive in return. But Ramey also has some core issues, one of which is perfectionism. A perfectionist gets defensive because things going just right is very core to the identity of a perfectionist. So there's if they feel like they're not performing accurately, then they're feeling like, well, I'm not the person that I'm supposed to be, and my world isn't perfect, and that says something about me in my core. And so it's a protective measure, you see, to be defensive. So we both got our kind of core things that show up in our arguments. And there's a remedy to this whole deal, which is Proverbs 25, verse 12, that says, this is a neat descriptive nugget of wisdom. Like an earring of gold or an ornament of fine gold is a wise man's rebuke to a listening ear. So you can see that there's both sender and receiver in here. You can see this two ways, right? A wise man will not use harsh startup. A wise man will not use criticism and contempt to levy a complaint or a rebuke. No, what he should be doing is encasing that rebuke or that complaint in gold. It's a treasure that you're giving somebody. But then a wise man, wise woman, wise spouse listens to the rebuke, listens to the complaint, and learns from it. And so we get sender and receiver here. You're careful to, okay, I got this complaint. Well, give it to them in a way that they can go like, hey, thanks for that gift. And then when you receive it, you're going, look, if I'm going to be wise, I've got to take what's true in here, admit it, apply it, and make the changes I got to make. By the way, we're not married, Kroll and I, but your executive pastor, who's a crucial leader in your church, is really good at this. Every once in a while, I have to come to Kroll and go, dude, you blew that. You were wrong there, or call him on something. And every single time I've had to do that with him in his 4 years here, he's gone, hey, thank you for that. Thank you for that gift of correction. He's a wise man, and it shows that your church is being led wisely. So, when a discussion begins with harsh startup, and criticism and contempt then lead to defensiveness, that creates a cyclone of more criticism, more contempt, and more defensiveness. Eventually, somebody's going to time out or tune out. And that heralds the arrival, the clip-clop of the fourth horseman, which is stonewalling. Stonewalling, closing up, pulling out completely. You know how you have the fight or flight thing, right? Your reaction, you can fight or flight. So stonewalling is the flight reaction. The Psalms actually talk about this. Psalm 17, verse 10, this says this, they close up their callous hearts. So the heart's gotten hard, maybe from years of criticism and contempt and defensiveness, but now they're just I'm just out. I'm shutting down. So, guy says something harsh and critical to his wife. It hurts her, but instead of her giving him back a wise rebuke, she just clams up and just holds the hurts inside. We call that gunny sacking or stonewalling. A guy comes home from work, his wife criticizes him within the first few minutes, and so he plops down and watches TV as sort of a little escape. Now she's yelling at him, so he goes to the garage. What he does is disengages. He's avoiding a fight, but what he's really doing is avoiding his marriage. Both husbands and wives can become stonewallers, but it is far more common with which gender? Men. And for reasons that we'll see in a couple of weeks. Stonewallers just shut down. They don't give any verbal or nonverbal feedback. They kind of look like they could care less. Stonewalling is really sort of a learned behavior. Stonewalling, the stonewalling horseman rides in kind of later in a troubled marriage. Like you don't see newlyweds stonewalling. It takes time for the hoofbeats of the first three horsemen, criticism, contempt, and defensiveness, to become overwhelming enough that stonewalling now seems like a way to get out of this mess, out of this problem. What stonewalling really is a signal of defeat. One spouse just gives up and kind of hopes that it'll go away. I'm just going to go to bed. Because sleep, I don't have to deal with this. It's defeat, and that's a problem because marriage is not a competition between spouses where one wins and the other loses. taking the defeat and hoping that it would just go away and that he or she will be quiet does not solve the problem. It actually feeds the four horsemen, and they come back into the next argument more vicious than ever. Okay. There's your first two predictors. The harsh startup, then these four horsemen. And you can identify these horsemen: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. It was really funny. Last night I walked into the lobby and my mom goes, she's like, I'm critical, he's a stonewaller. You know, they've been married 51 years, you know. So, like, you can identify, like, what your deal is. And I'm not leaving you much for remedy right now. I got another week to go on divorce predictors. But here's one thing that I would suggest that you do. You've got that sheet now, and you've got the words in there and maybe a few notes. And this is that deal. You sit down on a Sunday evening on the porch with something cold to drink, and you talk like friends. And you've got a little guide in front of you that says you can't do harsh startup. And you're not going to be critical. You can lobby a complaint, but not be critical. See, you've got this tool in front of you where you can have productive conversations. And so to close today, what I'd like to do is give you a little handle to grab onto that might help you in your discussions, and it can be kind of winsome, and maybe it'll be just a sort of productive thing to move your relationship forward, and you will all find this interesting because I find this interesting. Well, we're going to talk a little, I'm going to close today just talking a little biology with you. Because if it starts harsh, somebody's got to give that soft answer, right? So if you're angry, you've got to pull out of that and take a breather. I listened to John Ortberg interview a guy named Rick Blackman, who is a marriage and family therapist, and he talks about the two parts of your brain in relationship to arguing and anger. So he talks about the cerebral cortex. You know, your cerebral cortex, you remember this from biology class, is the thinking, reasoning, creative part of your brain. Thinking, reasoning, creative, and you have to be calm for that really to work well. When you're calm, your thinking, reasoning, creative part of your brain is working well. Then there's another part of your brain that, for lack of a better term, we'll just call it the reactive part of your brain. This is the instinctive part of your brain. This is the brain that kicks in when there's an emergency. This is where fight or flight happens. This is the part of your brain that is working in high gear when you are agitated or angry. Now, in the human brain, you don't have any excuse, because in the human brain, your cerebral cortex is huge. It's big. And you have a very small reactive part of your brain. And what's interesting about this is you put that up next to a bird brain and you see something significant. The dark part of your brain there is that reactive part of your brain. Look at the dark part of the bird's brain in comparison to its cerebral cortex. Their reactive brain is very large relatively. It's the same size. Now, what's that mean? What that means is birds don't think. They react instinctively. And birds are 100% self-protective. Means that a bird's always in fight or flight. They're always there. When you are in an argument and you are angry, so this just goes to life now, not just marriage, but when you're in an argument and there's anger, your spouse or you is going bird brain. Now, this is the handle I'm giving you. I'm not giving you permission to call your spouse a bird brain, but to describe the bird brain. There's a difference. Okay, so when you're angry, you are in the instinctive part of your brain, the reactive part of your brain, the fight or flight part of your brain. And Blackman says there is not a single productive conversation that happens in the bird brain. It's impossible. You're totally self-protective at that point. You're either going to fight or flight. You're either going harsh startup, criticism, contempt, and defensiveness, or you are stonewalling. There's your options. And when you are in the reactive part of your brain, this is when you say stupid things. Like you say hurtful things in the bird brain. And so the solution is that you cool down. You got to cool it. And that is a Hebrew word. And it's in Proverbs 29:11. A rebel shouts in anger, a wise man holds his temper in and cools it. And so what you have permission to do now is that when you see your spouse going bird brain, you can just claim Proverbs 29:11. You just call for it. Proverbs 29:11, cool it. All right? That shouldn't make each other mad. You're just like, oh yeah, that's a wise rebuke, and it came in gold. It's the scriptures, cool it. And by the way, biologically, it's 20 to 40 minutes for somebody to get out of the bird brain. When you get angry, all right, you're not going to stonewall. You're just pulling out to go from that little tiny part of your brain back to your big cerebral cortex. Thinking, reasoning, creative, no more fight and flight. Because a gentle answer gets people out of the bird brain. No birds, no horsemen. And you really will have a chance. All right, let's pray. Okay.